Many of his pieces are now part of the marimba standard repertoire. Matthias Schmidt has written the pieces Ganaya, Six Miniatures, Corrido, among others. The list is long. But now he has opened a new chapter in his artistic creations and productions, an Agnus Dei for mixed choir and marimba. The world premiere of his work occurred on May 22nd, 2011. The solo part was in the hands of Schmidt's duet partner of many years, Evgenia Kavajieva. The conductor was Christian Kabitz, director of the Bach Choir of St. Johannes Church in Würzburg.
The idea of composing an Agnus Dei for choir and marimba came from Leif Dramstad, the director and chief executive of Norsk. A few years ago, he proposed the idea to me at the International Music Trade Fair in Frankfurt. It took a long time to find an appropriate text. Finally, I decided to use the classical Agnus Dei, partly because the text has a long history in music, but not with the marimba as the primary instrument. The other reason I chose it is that from my Christian background, I know what the text means. I can't say that there was really a concrete or conscious preparation for composing the Agnus Dei. If at all, it came in small spurts. Of course, I have made and heard several different kinds of music in my lifetime, and I think these experiences are saved somewhere, but it is foreign to my nature. I'm not the type to develop an analytical approach just because I want to compose a certain work. One of these musical experiences was, for example, when I was a student at the Matthias Grünewald Gymnasium, a high school with a music emphasis. There I played the piano and organ and sang in the choir. A few years later, I played the keyboard and bass guitar in several bands at the same time, one of which was a Christian band that played very often in church services. So I think really that my experiences come from my actual music making and the direct feedback from people involved. I mean, band members, the audience, or at that time, the church congregations. I composed the piece at the piano, both the choral and marimba parts, although I tested the suitability of the part for marimba on the instrument itself, as well as its compatibility with the choir with Evgenia's help.
At the beginning of 2010, Matthias Schmidt played a few measures on the piano at his music school and said that he was currently composing a big work for marimba and choir, and that those were the first parts of the first movement. I really like what I heard. I was very enthusiastic and could well imagine the combination of marimba with its timbre and tonal possibilities and choral voices.
A particular challenge for me was at some point the length and form of the piece. For many years I have written and produced pop music, so I'm used to a 3 to 4 minute playing time and certain parts such as intro, verse, bridge, refrain, etc. Earlier, I often worked as a studio musician and did the warm-ups for the entire backing vocals. I have a very good head voice, so choral arranging was not a problem, but what I really had to pay attention to was the notation of the vocal parts and what information I had to convey, for instance tempo, dynamics, expression, so that it would sound like I imagine it to sound. That's why the cooperation with Christian Kabitz, the conductor of the piece's premiere, was of course so helpful. He gave me a lot of tips on the notation from the conductor's perspective. I began composing it, by the way, in January 2010 and wrote until the end of March. At that point, the piece was about 80% finished. Because I knew that the premiere would be in the next year, I let the piece rest for a while. After about half a year, I took up work on it again and put on some finishing touches, which tried out with Evgenia on our practice room on the marimba and keyboard. She was truly a very big help.
The first rehearsals we had were with marimba and keyboard. In the course of rehearsing, the marimba part changed a few times. I was able to assist in the whole process of developing the marimba part. We had to constantly try out what things would work. For instance, which role the marimba should have a certain part, if a chord should be tremolo or not, tempo changes, and later a few solo measures were added. I think Matthias made optimal use of the low register for which the Studio 49 marimba is so well known. When Matthias asked me a little while later if I could imagine playing the premiere, I was thrilled and grateful. Of course, I said yes immediately, because I knew that it would be a big challenge and a new experience for me. I had the opportunity of being part of the entire composing process.
Recently in an interview, I was asked about the harmonic base and foundation of Agnus Dei. I answered truthfully that I didn't know. I mean, honestly, I had to snatch the score and analyze it before I could answer this question. The question implies, namely, pre-existence of something, let's say a master plan. But I didn't have that. I think I have a good instinct for harmonies and timbre that develop from the progression of chords. Claude Debussy supposedly said that he needed months to decide between two chords. I can completely understand, empathize with that. An octave between bass and tenor or alto-soprano isn't anything special. But if you have used a very complicated harmony prior to that, which should dissipate into the octave and at the same time emphasize the lyrics and not just repeat them, exactly at this moment, is this music unique? I write very intuitively, and usually, if I analyze a piece of music after finishing it, often months or years later, then I can see a clear setup, a recognizable structure or architecture. Sometimes, though, I second-guess myself while composing in order to follow a clear line. I think that all depends on the complexity of the work. The rehearsals were in a relatively small room without great acoustics. In other words, not like they would be in a church with an echo or reverberation. As I was writing the piece, though, I always imagined it being played in a church with the corresponding acoustics. So I had to first get used to the acoustics of our practice room without losing sight of the ideal acoustics for the piece.
At the first choir rehearsals that I heard, it became clear to me that this would be completely different from playing with an orchestra. I had to sing alone, so to speak, and breathe with the singers in order to phrase the same way as they did. I couldn't think of my part on marimba as a solo or as an accompaniment. It is simply a part of the entire piece. That's why it was important to me to have enough rehearsals with the choir before the concert, so that the marimba and I could blend in with the voices. Naturally, Matthias had assumed there would be changes. For example, after the first rehearsals, I chose different mallets. Similarly, during the course of rehearsals and after consultation with me and the conductor, Matthias changed the tempo at certain points.
The sound I imagined was definitely shaped by the sound of my relatively new Studio 49 marimba. It is a fantastic instrument that captivates listeners with its balance and warm tone. I am especially pleased with the lower position on the instrument, although I have to add that there are also versions of the piece for A and F marimbas. Due to the excellent sound of the marimba, I have used the instrument partly as an accompaniment, partly as choir register, or as solo instrument, or as a choir voice, which of course requires that the player really gets to know the score in order to fill the various roles of the instruments in the piece. Together they sounded just as I had imagined it. Although I have to admit it is always an emotional experience when I hear for the first time a piece that I have thought out, but that I don't play myself. The choral sound is even more intensive.
The rehearsals with the Würzburg Bach Choir under the direction of Christian Kabitz, and of course the premiere, were a great experience for me.
Ganaya, which I produced and published myself, got the attention of Norsk. The company got in touch with me through Katarzyna Miczka. They asked me about other pieces, and when, in a further conversation, Leif Darmstadt, the director of Norsk, signaled that he wanted to publish a whole catalogue of my pieces, I was ecstatic about the idea and began to write with great motivation up until today. The cooperation is simply fantastic. One could call it what connects me with Leif Darmstadt and his team, an artistically inspired friendship.
I hope that I can play the Agnus Dei often in the future. It would also be great if the work would attract the attention of other marimba players, because a piece comes alive only when it is played.
It is possible that I will write more sacred works. I really had fun working on Agnus Dei, and I learned a lot in the process of creating the work.